Hola, buenas tardes para todos. Bienvenidos a una nueva edición de Azure en el Bar. Gracias por acompañarnos una vez más en este nuevo Gold Edition. Y bueno, hoy nos acompaña justamente Boward, Principal Architect Azure Data en Microsoft, que la verdad es un lujo poder tenerlo con nosotros y poder hacerle estas consultas que hemos estado armando con ustedes, con la comunidad y entre nosotros, así que bueno, es un placer y como todos saben, Azure en el Bar es esta iniciativa que intentamos justamente poder juntar la comunidad de la TAM con lo que es Microsoft Corp. Y bueno, justamente parte de esto es la realidad que tenemos hoy, que junto a Javier, Gastón y Cristóbal vamos llevando adelante con la ayuda de toda la comunidad y toda la comunidad de MVPs. Así que bueno, espero que disfruten el capítulo. Espero que nos puedan ir haciendo las consultas en el chat de YouTube. Iremos ahí a medida que se puede ir haciendo consultas. Ya hemos tenido algunas consultas durante las semanas, en algunos challenges que lanzamos. Y bueno, como siempre, los que hayan visto otra edición de Gold, vamos a cambiar inglés. Intentaremos que todos lo puedan entender. Está el transcript ahí para que no se pierdan nada. Y bueno, así que lanzamos por ahí. So, hello Bob, good evening. Welcome to Azure in el Bar. Thank you for your company and let us spend some time for you today. And it's really a pleasure to have you today. And tell me, introduce what is Azure in el Bar. It's an initiative was born as a group of friends from different countries in LATAM looking for a way to continue sharing and connecting with the community. And a brief introduction of me. My name is Alex Rostan. I'm an Uruguayan, now living in Asunción, Paraguay. I am Business Applications MVP. I'm working as a cloud architect for Encamina, Spain. I'm leader of the Power Platform community here in Paraguay. That's my short story. Please, Gaston, tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, hello all. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to have this kind of Gold edition today with Bob, kind of recognized speaker all around. My name is Gaston Cruz, and another Uruguayan living in Bellevue, Washington. For the last 2 years ago, we moved with my family here, and since then we have a kind of a roller coaster with all this kind of context right now. Working as a senior principal within Microsoft Center of Excellence in Slalom. I've been in data platform world as an MVP for the last kind of 15 years, architecting solutions, and I've been in different LATAM countries with leaders and communities out there. Now I am part of the Microsoft kind of news about the Microsoft Global Data Community Advisory Board. We've been trying to pull together all the communities, so I appreciate any feedback. If you want some help to get on board with that huge community that we are trying to build here, that's going to be awesome. Just please get in touch with me. And I'm really passionate about connecting with LATAM communities and bring this kind of energy to our LATAM communities. So go ahead and present yourself, Cristobal.
Thank you, Gaston. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy and grateful to be with you in this version of a new chapter of Azure en el Bar. Currently, I live in Chile. I work as data and analytic manager at Everest, and company of entity data. In addition to that, I actively participate in the past community, and it's how I meet the guys and our local group in Chile. It's called Power BI User Group, where we are already more than 300 users. Very grateful for being able to collaborate with the LATAM community. From now, I hope you have a fun day. Please, Javier, introduce yourself.
Thanks, Cristobal. Well, hello, everybody. I am Javier Villegas from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I've been working at Mediterranean Shipping Company for the last 15 years. I am Microsoft MVP in the data platform community, and also a member of SQL Argentina group. We really hope you have a great time today while we learn with our main guest, Bob Ward. So, Bob, thank you so much for being here with us today. It's a pleasure and an honor for me, for the whole Azure en el Bar team, to have you here sharing time with the Latin American community. So we would like to know a little bit more about yourself. So if you can introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much, all of you. And thank you, everybody tuning in. It's such an honor to be invited to your event. It sounds like you've just got an amazing community. Especially appreciate we're going to talk in English. I aspire to learn Spanish, but maybe just trying at this point. So I'm Bob Ward. I'm a principal architect with the Microsoft Azure Data Team, and I'm live here from my home, actually, in North Richland Hills, Texas, in the United States. So that's where I'm based in the state of Texas. I was joking with the guys earlier. This is my university team, Baylor University, that I went to college, as we're having a big major basketball tournament here in the United States the next few weeks. So I'm sponsoring my university that I went to college. So I have been at Microsoft now. I know it's just crazy to even say this out loud, but this is my 28th year at Microsoft, all working with SQL. I started in the organization in 1993. And I know that because my oldest son, dates my career at Microsoft. He's as old as I've been here at the company. And I've been working on every version of SQL all the way back to OS 2 1.1. Does anybody even know what OS 2 is? What is an OS 2, right? But yeah, and I've seen it all. I've seen all the versions of SQL Server we've ever shipped. And even now spending time and all the work we've done in the cloud with Azure SQL. So hey, it's just a great honor to be here with all of you, and look forward to our chat today.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for this introduction. So, well, you just mentioned Microsoft. You mentioned 28 years at the company. I mean, we don't even know. I mean, some of the people here today, they don't know what OS is, and you were showing us before some piece of history that you have with you. So can you tell us a little bit more about this 27 years journey within Microsoft and within the SQL Server family, or let's say product line?
Sure. This is what I was showing earlier. These are, and so you have probably some younger people. You have younger people here, like Cristobal. You look really young. So you have younger people here on the broadcast that are like, "What is this?" These are actual diskettes to install SQL OS 2 1.1. So this just shows you where we've come. That originally SQL being a little small database product run on little computers for little offices and departments based on diskettes and based on the OS 2 operating system, which doesn't even exist anymore. This is before we decided to be able to run SQL Server on Windows NT. And you may or may not know, but SQL Server has a very long background with Sybase. So Sybase was a company that ran on Unix systems, and Microsoft, way back then, formed a partnership with Sybase to run a version of Sybase, call it SQL Server, and run it on OS 2. And then eventually Windows NT. And then we decided that this could be a big thing. Bill Gates back in the day actually said this database thing might be a pretty big thing. So let's separate ourselves from Sybase and let's go forth and build our own database product. So think of that journey. In 1993, diskettes, small little computers, and now SQL Server is an industry force. I mean, think of some of the largest companies in the world that base SQL Server. All the different deployments of SQL, your community alone being an example of people wanting to spread that knowledge. And then now, of course, SQL Server running even on little IoT edge devices, running in public clouds. I mean, who would ever thought we would do anything like that? The journey's been amazing. It's been amazing to see the transformation of SQL Server to, again, be this like easy to use, install database that a lot of people ran, to just being this thing that could host major companies. Your company, Javier, is a good example of that, right? To host their business, run their business on SQL, and make that journey along the way. Make the journey along the way with Windows Server, but then eventually now hit things like Linux containers, Kubernetes, running in public clouds, running everywhere. I mean, I have this term, SQL is everywhere you need it. So if you need SQL somewhere, we find a way to show up. And it's been a pleasure and an honor to be a deep part of Microsoft along this entire journey.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Well, continue with the topic and specific with SQL Server. What really means SQL Server for you? What really means SQL Server for Bob Ward?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because my heart and bread and butter are in the database engine. The engine powers this thing. So you think about what I just said. I just said SQL runs on IoT devices, Linux, Kubernetes, Windows servers, clouds, everywhere. But at the heart of that is the engine itself. This database engine that we just built on all sorts of things with it. And that comes with the T-SQL language. So when I think of SQL Server, I think of this amazing engine that we've built that is just at the heart of all these great solutions. And so I still today get the biggest pleasure out of presenting on the internals of this engine. We were talking before we started here and went live. Some of you have been to the past summit in the past and seen me do these deep dive talks on the engine. And it still gives me great pleasure to whip up the Windows debugger and show the SQL engine and how it works under the covers. Because you know what? It is an amazing piece of technology that we've built that still is almost the same engine we built in SQL 7.0. That was kind of our next, our revision of the engine with SQL 7.0. And that engine, a lot of that code still works great today, actually. All these great innovations we've done like SQL OS and dynamic management views and high availability and all the stuff we've built. So when I think of SQL Server, it always comes down to just a great database engine that powers it all.
Thanks, Bob. Well, I have another question for you. Could you explain us more about the challenge of being member of the SQL Server engineering team?
Yeah, that's a good one. So one thing I didn't say about my career is I actually was a developer before I joined Microsoft. I was a programmer, worked on Oracle, Unix systems, but I wanted to not be a developer anymore because it was a lot of hours. And I was having a baby. So I just luckily stumbled on Microsoft, who hired me to be in their support organization. And the reason why, they wanted me to come in and help people solve problems with SQL Server, but I had this developer background, so I knew how to debug things and look at things, under the covers. So I worked with support organization here in Texas for many, many, many years. Now, I had a lot of opportunities to work with engineering over those years, but the requirement back in the day for Microsoft was to move to Seattle, Washington to do that. And I just love Texas. I mean, that's where I'm from. I just love living here. And I just didn't really want to, I wanted to work with engineering, believe me, but I didn't want to leave Texas. So about 5 years ago, Rohan Kumar, current vice president of Azure Data, who I've known a long time, literally picks up the phone and is like, hey, I think you should just work for me. Like, I know you've been doing support for a long period of time, but you're like a face of SQL Server for us. So why don't you just represent me in engineering? And I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? And Rohan's like, we'll figure that later. Just come work for the engineering team, right? So one of the challenges to be in engineering is the fact that I'm not a developer in engineering. Okay, I don't build the product necessarily. In fact, I really don't even own parts of the release of the product. I don't program manage a feature or something. So that's been a challenge because you're like, what do you do then? Like, what is your core part? And so what I kind of translate what I do to the rest of the team is I just make them look good. I take developers who, I mean, some of the smartest people in the world I know are in our engineering team, right? And I meet with them and I just try to go translate all the great work they do so that you guys can understand what we've built. And it's just a pleasure to do that. Now, I am technically an architect, so I do get involved with decisions and design decisions on things we're doing for future releases of SQL, things in the cloud and so forth. But that's my biggest challenge in engineering is the fact that my core role of my job is not really well defined. It's really up to me to do that. And my manager always is ensured that that's what I'll do. I'll always find a way to make sure that we're getting a great message out of what we do in SQL. So it's a challenge, but it's also been a blessing. I've enjoyed every bit of it. Before the pandemic hit, I was probably flying 50,000 miles a year around the world to talk about SQL. So pandemic hits, now I'm doing 50,000 virtual miles around the world to present. Gaston said Bob, I think I've seen you in a video just about every day of the week. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of been right here in my office here. That's kind of like my life, right? But yeah, it's been a challenge, but also a blessing, Cristobal.
Thank you for that. Bob, one question that I have is kind of what do you feel in terms of, and talking about the main topic here in the Azure and Elbar, what do you think about the cloud? How the cloud changed a little bit, maybe huge change for data platform projects?
Yeah, I mean, to me, when people ask me this question a lot, actually, and I think one of the things that just stands out if people haven't spent time with the cloud is just some of the headaches that you deal with today that you don't deal with anymore because we are responsible for owning it. So when I've done a lot of this training recently on Azure SQL, I explain what versionless SQL Server is. People are like, what the heck is a versionless SQL Server? And so I relate it to your world. How would you like to never have to worry about patching SQL anymore? Like if SQL had a problem and it got patched, like you have to go roll it back and manage this and do that. I was before the pandemic hit, I was traveling in North Carolina with a customer and we were at dinner together. And all of a sudden they said, hey, we got to end the dinner. We got to go back to the office and spend the next 4 hours at the office. I'm like, why? They're like, oh, it's patching time. We've got to patch all the operating systems, all the SQLs. They were responsible doing it for the entire company. And I just sat there and thought about that. And I thought, wouldn't you like to not have to do that anymore? That would be kind of nice, right? So versionless SQL servers exist today in platform as a service with Azure SQL Database and Azure SQL Managed Instance. And that's just a major difference in why people think about how SQL servers operated in their environment. Another great example how the data platform has changed with the cloud is since we are at economies of scale deploying millions of SQL databases across the world is high availability. Today in your environment, you probably have to spend a lot of time ensuring that you meet what I would call a service level agreement for your company. If you're managing your own SQLs, you're in charge of making sure this thing's available. Wouldn't it be nice if I could pay Microsoft to do that? Like, it'd be kind of cool if Microsoft could worry about my backups and making sure it's available, and they put their money where their mouth is. Like, you sign a subscription and then Microsoft pays me back if they don't meet that standard. We have a big incentive to do it, right? Mm-hmm. I think that is a major transformation for how people think how to manage and look at SQL servers. But here's the thing, when I talk to people about it, that's a transformation, but SQL's only can perform as well as the queries you throw at it. So all those performance skills you've grown, all the T-SQL skills, they absolutely all still apply in the cloud. And when I describe all that to people that don't know Azure and SQL in the cloud, they're like, oh, I didn't know that. I thought the thing just runs on its own and I never have to worry about anything. That's not true. Your skills are still very valuable when it comes to the cloud, but those are versionless and high availability automations. Those are some of the biggest things I've seen had a huge transformation with data platforms in the cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. In that matter, we as part of the community many years ago when we started with the whole cloud thing, we got the fellows, the DBA saying, hey, now we're going to lose our shop because Microsoft is going to be doing all that for us. And, after several years, we can say that this assumption was completely wrong. Right? Of course, you have to evolve your skills, right? Like the engine and the whole platform is evolving, but that was not the case at all. And in that matter, we also noticed that SQL Server or the whole Azure SQL environment, there is no much stuff to put it at the top because it's really a mature environment. But every time we get a new version of SQL Server on-prem, we see a ton of features that to me are amazing. And we see them first in the cloud and then in the product. So this is something that we, as a data platform guys, we really love from this new ecosystem from Microsoft. We really love it. And in that term, right, you just mentioned a few of the things earlier. We see that you have some books there. So
Yeah, that's true.
Can you tell us a little bit about this? I mean, we saw you every day on a different video teaching about SQL,
Yes.
and also your book. So can you go through that a little
Sure,
bit?
sure. Yeah, there's a little bit of history here at Microsoft, but I will tell you first that I wrote some books, right? You know that.
Yeah.
So these three right here, these three represent books here that I've written over the last 3 years. So it all started with SQL Server on Linux. That was a really fun journey because my background was with Unix before I joined Microsoft. So it was really fun to go back and revisit all the. Of course, they didn't have Linux; it was called Unix, right? So to go back and revisit all of that was a lot of fun. But it was my first, writing a book. I'd never written a book before. That was hard, right? And then SQL 19 came out, and that was just a pure pleasure because I was able to write this book, SQL 19 Revealed, as we developed, the product. As we were building it, I was writing the book at the same time. And then as we talking about the cloud as appropriate, I decided to just go off the deep end and work on the cloud. So I wrote this book just this last year. It shipped last year, called Azure SQL Revealed. And this is a comparison of SQL Server. So if you're a SQL Server person and you're like, hey, how does my skills compare to Azure SQL? That's what this book is. It's a complete version of that. And what was really fun about writing these books is I kind of like history. I'm a historian kind of by nature. And every one of these books, the first chapter is the history of that project. So for Linux, which was called Project Helsinki, I interviewed people like Slava Oaks. Like, Slava, tell me the origins of SQL Linux. And he went back and told me all these stories about when he first got it approved and built it. So the first chapter is about that project. SQL 19 Revealed was called Project Seattle, aptly named after the city. And I was able to go back and interview, and I was part of that journey. But I was also interview people like Travis Wright, who were there from the very beginning of the project. And then Azure SQL Revealed was the hardest one of all because Azure's been around for over 10 years, right? So I had to go back and I had to look up and find people that don't work at Microsoft anymore that worked on this and interview them to write that chapter. The first chapter of this book took the longest chapter of any part of the book, the history part of Azure SQL, to go back and find all this stuff about how he built and how Azure SQL's evolved over the years. So those are 3 fun books, but you'll get a biggest kick out of this one. This right here, does anybody even use these anymore, these binders? Right?
Yeah.
Like in school, right? Binders? So this is a Sybase internals book that I was given my first day at work. So the very first day at work, my manager sat me down and said, hey, go learn this. And this is all the internal structures of the SQL engine back in 1993 with the Sybase engine. And when I was cleaning my office out, like the diskettes I found this. And I thought, well, that's just a great historical thing to keep around. It's the paper, the pages are ripped and it's all brown paper and stuff and everything. But it's an interesting, I looked at it though, and just like you asked me about SQL Server, it's an interesting view of how things have changed over time, but how things are the same. One of the #1 commands in this book is DBCC, all inside this book, right? So those are just some examples of some books I have. Also, here's the original Inside Windows NT book. So when I joined Microsoft, my manager said, you need to buy and learn this book because we are launching SQL on Windows NT and you need to be smart about Windows NT. So, and I'm like, okay, but it was easy for me to read because I knew the internals of Unix. I knew operating system design, right? And so this was a great read because, Dave Cutler, who was the founder and the person who invented Windows NT, really kind of described Windows NT from the perspective of a Unix person. So it was kind of easy for me to go do that. But those are just a few fun books that I have here in my library.
Good. Thank you for sharing with us.
Yeah.
And this time we started like a new initiative to ask people from our community to send us some questions we can ask to our guests. So we have one from Pablo from Bolivia. He's asking, how do you see the adoption of Kubernetes working with SQL Server going so far? And what is the future in that path?
It's a great question, Pablo. It's slow to start with. Kubernetes has been around for a little bit, as Pablo, as you may know, but it's not like it's as mainstream as Windows Server and just Linux itself, right? So we definitely want to make investments with SQL Kubernetes, and you see evidence of that with things like big data clusters and Azure Arc, both SQL Server products that work on Kubernetes. One of the challenges I think with Kubernetes is there's so many version distributions out there, right? Like with Windows Server, everybody can learn Windows Server and it just works. And even with Linux, there are a few Linux distributions that most people go adopt and they get to learn Linux, but there's so many Kubernetes distributions right now, like which one would you go learn and use? The other challenge is that while Kubernetes has some really amazing aspects to give you automation, there's still a lot to get right to make it work correctly with like a SQL server, especially when it comes from things like storage and networking, to hook that all up and get it correct. So I've had customers tell me, I want to deploy SQL Server on Kubernetes. Sounds great. Let's go do all this stuff. And I'm like, my first question is, well, who knows Kubernetes in your organization? Even Azure Kubernetes, which is kind of a managed Kubernetes, there are still aspects of that you've got to maintain and manage of the Kubernetes itself. So that is a challenge. Now, that same challenge can exist for somebody with Windows Server. But again, Windows Server is Windows Server. There's only one of them. There's so many different Kubernetes variations like OpenShift and Azure Kubernetes Service and Rancher and even just upstream kubeadm. That's kind of a challenge. So I see just the beginning of us on this journey, but you can see that we are going to invest in this because of the results of things like a big data cluster or Azure Arc. We're definitely putting some investments in the space.
Okay. Yeah, we see the investments everywhere in that area. And what about the adoption on the Linux platform? Not Kubernetes, but just...
Sure. It's been good. I mean, we remember we launched SQL Server on Linux with SQL 2017. And a lot of people looked at us and said, oh, you're just doing this because you just want to see some, just a check mark for Microsoft. That is not the case at all. We really did this based on customer demand and on partner demand. People like Red Hat came to us and said, hey, we heard you guys are pretty good. We think you might be better than that company that starts with an O. Sorry, I had to throw that in there. So, can you guys make SQL run on Linux? And if you've not seen that story before, we built some amazing technology called the SQL PAL that allows SQL Server to run on Linux, but it doesn't have to run 100% natively as a Linux program. It's kind of weird how we did this thing, right? But it runs great. The benchmarks prove how fast it is. So the adoption's been good. SQL Server on Windows is still our predominant customer base out there, but we've had a great success, I think, for running SQL on Linux. Again, the only issue there, of course, is that what is that Linux distribution that everybody wants to go run? Is it Red Hat? Is it SUSE? Is it Ubuntu? We picked those three distributions because we thought those were the predominant commercial versions in the marketplace where you could get the best support, both for Linux and for SQL. But no, we've had several different big customers go move and run SQL on Linux. In fact, what we've seen is an interesting paradigm where customers maybe have acquired another company, and that company's like a Linux shop or something. And they come in, they're like, well, we're SQL Windows people, you guys are Linux people, but now it doesn't matter because you can run them on both, right? So that's been an interesting paradigm of customers that kind of a hybrid model where they have SQL instances both on Windows and Linux, just because of the nature of what's going on in their organization.
That customer, by the way, was right.
Yeah, there you go.
Thanks.
Well, Bob, in term of advice, and what can you tell us about of the audience about how to start with data platform? How to start to the world of data platform?
You mean if you've never been involved with data at all? Or? Yeah. That's not easy. I think one thing you have to think about from data is what kind of role do you want to have with it? Like if you want to be a developer, you're going to take a different path, right, to go use data than if you're going to be like an administrator or even an analyst. So for example, let's say that you love analytics, you like analysis, you like business analysis, you're going to go a different path. You're going to start learning Power BI. You're going to learn Synapse. You're going to learn different technologies, maybe even machine learning, right? That are going to help you solve business problems. You're not going to go into the depth of learning SQL Server. Why would you do that, right? So that's one road. But you may be somebody who's like, look, I think this SQL thing is amazing. I heard people talking about it all the time. I'm the kind of person that wants to go maintain operationally a business with a data platform, right? And so that's when you're going to want to learn things like SQL Server. You know, one of the things that we did, an Azure SQL Revealed book is a part of that, is we embarked on a journey way back in December of 19 with a mission to make everyone that knows SQL comfortable knowing Azure SQL. Okay. And Javier mentioned when we were first coming on here about all these videos you see me on and so forth. So what we did was something pretty interesting. We first built a slide deck and a GitHub repo. And you can find that if you go look at our SQL Workshop site. You can go see it. We call it the Azure SQL Workshop. Now, that's interesting, and it's fun to go through and look at, and you can learn Azure SQL from a SQL Server perspective. That's one thing. But we discovered part of our organization at Microsoft has something called Microsoft Learn. You may have heard of that before, with a concept called the learning path. Now, here's one thing that's really interesting. We took the same content from the decks and the GitHub, we put it in a learning path, and you get a free Azure sandbox when you do this. So you're somebody today who knows SQL, or you start learning SQL Server. You want to learn Azure SQL, but you don't. How are you going to pay for it? I mean, SQL Server Developer Edition allows you to put a free version on your laptop. Like I built a workshop for SQL 19. You can install Developer Edition and take my entire workshop for free on your laptop. But for Azure, you got to pay for a subscription. You can try the trial out there and so forth, but it may not be enough. So Microsoft Learn funds you. You just sign up for the learning path for free. You get a free Azure SQL database to play around with and take our training. That's pretty cool. Now, we know from our experience that some people learn really well by watching and listening, okay, just like we're doing that today. So we partnered with Channel 9 to go build 60 some plus videos, and we call that Azure SQL for Beginners. It's the same content. It's that slide deck and the learning path, except it's Anna Hoffman and I, my colleague Anna Hoffman. We get into these little 5-minute videos across all these topics. So you can learn as you would like on demand. Pretty successful, right? So the team at Microsoft Learn said, that's pretty amazing. Would you come do a learning live session with us where you do these training sessions with us on Learn, on television, like on YouTube, and would you do it over a period of 6 weeks? And we just started that. We started last Monday, was our first edition. You can go watch it on demand right now. Go look at Learn Live, Azure SQL, and you'll see Anna and I. In fact, you'll see me here in this office on the recording. And then we're going to continue that journey over the next 5 weeks with the remaining modules. So, you know, if you want to get started on the data platform, Microsoft Learn can be a really great path for you to go learn. And here's the other really great bonus. If you are right now, let's say Azure is something you want to get involved in, but you don't have experience, like a company would like you to know Azure, but you've never done it before. You've seen what we have called Azure certifications at Microsoft. Like there's one called the Data Platform 300 certification. We have had people that have, all they've done is taking our training, which is all free, by the way. It's all free training. And they've passed that exam just by taking the training. So, you know, I've had people reach out to me on LinkedIn and say, how do I get started in Azure? And I'm like, go take the certifications, because they force you to go through the learning path. You get certified. Now you can go to this company and say, hey, I've got all this great SQL background, but I'm also certified in Azure.
Thanks, Bob. Well, I have, Bob, another question from the audience.
Yeah.
And this is from Argentina, our friends Gonzalo Vicio. And he say, well, what was the biggest challenge of your technical career?
Oh, man. Wow. Okay. Well, let's keep it to Microsoft for 28 years. How about we do that? Yes, I think I can easily tell you this answer. And maybe you don't, none of you on the call remember this, but in 2003, I was in support, and we had this thing that came up called Slammer. Anybody ever heard of that? Slammer, a virus. So what happened is back in the day, security has been important at Microsoft for many years, but not as important as it is now. And Slammer was the reason for it. So back in the day, we had a bug in SQL Server as part of our browser service where this could cause a broadcast storm on a network, effectively just taking down a network, right? We fixed this bug, but we had the bug back in 2002. We created a fix for it. But back then, the idea of applying security updates was not as popular as it is today. So what happened is you've got all these SQL servers out there across the world that have this virus. Somebody just exploits it, and all of a sudden you get a broadcast storm that brings down the internet. Yes, SQL Server brought down the internet worldwide in 2003 for a period of several weeks. Obviously, patches of it, right? So it was so technically challenging in support to not only help the product engineering team fix this problem, because we already had a bug fix for it, but how do we get it out to everybody when we can't get to the internet, right? And then just the challenge of just the pure exhaustion. I remember I stayed awake for 72 straight hours at the office. I just stayed up there for 72 hours, calling customer after customer and patching them and patching them. I mean, I remember one time we had a really big Wall Street firm that I was on a phone call, and the virus hadn't hit them, but it started hitting them. So we told them to take their entire organization and sprint around the building, power off all the computers, just shut them all down. Here's what we found. Visual Studio included SQL Server. There was something called Microsoft Desktop Edition that was inside Visual Studio. So every Visual Studio installation was causing this virus around the world. We didn't know that. We're like, oh, how can so many SQL servers be causing this? Well, hey, everybody had Visual Studio. They were just propagating the thing, right? So it was super challenging. And it also set a standard that exists today. We spent the next year at Microsoft exhaustively looking at security, and it became such a focal point for us. We had civil defense drills. We really made security to be the number one thing we would always do no matter what we're doing. And if you look today at like industry standards for security vulnerabilities for database products, we have the least of anybody. And honestly, Slammer was the event that probably triggered all that.
And that is true for the last 9 years.
Yeah, exactly. But maybe if Slammer hadn't happened, I don't know. We'll see. It was something else, something I'll never forget in my career at Microsoft.
Absolutely. Wow.
So next one, I'm gonna pick it up kind of another topic. We are all about audience and communities and engagements, and based on our current context also. What do you see in terms of the engagement in the community right now? And talking maybe about kind of past summit and everybody from our data platform world jumping around and seeing, okay, what is next? What is the next move? How we gather again? How we are going to gather all those communities together in a global community? How do you see that? What are your thoughts about communities right now?
Well, one thing's for sure. This pandemic has stretched people beyond, their just means, right? I mean, it's stretched all of us. Yeah. It certainly has resulted in some very unfortunate situations for things like communities, like the PASS organization and so forth, that kind of type thing, which is very, very unfortunate what's occurred. However, because of the fact that people are more digitally connected now than ever before, it's also kind of brought some people together, quite frankly, in my opinion, that I've seen to become a stronger community. One of the initiatives that at Microsoft that we were very passionate about once we found out ourselves about the PASS organization dissolving, even though, as you've seen publicly, Redgate as a company has decided to try to take forward that concept some, is that we're passionate about community. I'm super passionate about community. In fact, I have this kind of motto that I kept floating around to the team is that the community owns it, but Microsoft powers you. Like, we should be part of empowering people in the community in every way we possibly can. So we started this initiative just recently. Buck Woody, my colleague, Buck Woody, and Irish, they own communities for Azure SQL, and they have started a new Azure Data Community Initiative. Gaston, I think you are actually a part of, you've been now closely a part of that initiative. I'm so excited about this because it's not just going to be about communities having communities. And Gaston, you can tell us more than me, they're trying to bring communities together to talk about things, right?
Exactly. And we are really open to hear from leaders from other communities, even if they are talking about jumping into different stuff, different kind of community engagement with different, let's say, someone starting with the Data Saturdays right now, and the umbrella is for everyone. So
right.
we want to hear from them and see what's going on and what they need and how we can support them.
Right.
And one question about kind of our LATAM community. What are your thoughts about the LATAM communities? What you heard from LATAM communities?
It's funny. I have met so many people from LATAM communities at big events in person over the years. I actually have done a few virtual things with LATAM communities in the past. Not many, but some. But I will just say this. I look forward to the day that we all feel comfortable doing something in person. I have never been to South America, so I just look forward to this great opportunity to come down there and do something in person, right? But yeah, I honestly, I can't remember the gentleman's name. He's from Guatemala in Central America. He actually is somebody I met at a Denver user group. His name is Carlos. Sorry, Carlos, my apologies if you're listening. I don't remember your last name, but anyways, super passionate.
Carlos Robles.
Yeah, I think that's it. Yes, that's who it is. Yes, it is. Sorry. And again, Carlos, I'm so sorry because he's met my wife. We had this great time. I met him in Denver. And super passionate person, right? So one thing about LATAM communities that I've seen through people like yourself and Carlos is just passion. I mean, you guys really have a passion for learning this stuff. I mean, look at you invited me to be here on your program today and taking time out of your busy schedule to do this, right? And people that are tuning in probably after work, right? So I think maybe the Gaston, the way to summarize this is I look forward to being in a bar with all of you, drinking your favorite beverage, and maybe we'll just tell war stories about SQL around the bar, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is what we are all looking forward to get out of here.
Everyone is.
So, Bob, question of, and this is a broad question actually, how do you see the future or the roadmap in terms of data platform and particularly SQL Server? We know, we check the news, the feed, etc., and we see that Azure is releasing new features, new product updates every millisecond. Right, so Microsoft is definitely delivering features, product. Not sure if is faster than ever, but there should be like a roadmap, right? Something like is I don't know if it is a target or a moving target in terms of data platform evolving. What can you tell us in that matter?
Yeah, I mean, just one comment about the cloud volatility. It's not because we just want to make things volatile. It's because we have the ability to innovate very quickly. When we own the platform, it's a lot easier for us to release a new functionality, right? When you own all the assets on your infrastructure, we can't do that. It's very difficult to do that, right? So that's one reason why you see innovation very quickly there, because we can do it. But quite frankly, also because customers are asking for us that. I mean, if we're going to own the platform, customers are like, how come I can't get functionality faster from you? Because, you're managing the VMs and the infrastructure and everything. I would love to just you to light up a feature for me so I can just start using the thing. So one of the things and the challenges at Microsoft is from a roadmap perspective is, industry changes, the businesses change, the world changes. So if we were to go out there and create a 3-year roadmap for all the stuff we're going to go do, it could change in a month. So we actually, as it turns out, you should know this, we actually plan on what we call a semester level at Microsoft. We actually do planning at like a 6-month level. And sometimes you see the fruits of us talking about that through like a public preview announcement for like an Azure SQL or something. Now, SQL Server can't operate that way, right? It's kind of hard to do it that way. So the interesting thing about SQL Server is, though, we talked about the core engine. I got that question earlier about what is SQL Server. The heart of what we innovate for Azure SQL is SQL Server. So when you see things coming out in Azure SQL, that is us behind the scenes innovating on SQL Server already. You're just seeing in the factor of an Azure SQL cloud release versus a new on-premises version of SQL Server. So what we do is we are always innovating on SQL Server. You see it through the cloud. And then we have to just make business decisions is that when is the right time to try to go and release a new version of an on-premises version of SQL Server based, again, on what customers feel that they demand and need, and based on just business value. What are major things that we want to collect and put together in a new release? So it's a little difficult for us to put all these roadmaps all down the road down there because, again, we've just noticed that the things change so often. If we did that, we'd have to retract it and say, oh, yeah, we've changed our mind. People have gotten a little more frustrating, I think, with that. I think from a data platform perspective, what's a little bit interesting in the cloud is just how things are integrating together. So, you got a Synapse that we've announced. Obviously, we've had that before, Azure Data Warehouse. And then you start seeing us take that Synapse thing and linking things to it together all the time, right? You see machine learning linking things together. So from a data platform perspective, I think it's a little bit more about how does one build a solution that puts all these things together versus just one thing that you might go out there and get.
Good. Well, we are getting close to the end, but I have a personal question for you. Is what is your favorite feature in SQL Server?
My favorite feature? Oh, I can easily answer this for SQL 19. It's absolutely accelerated database recovery. So let's have some fun on the phone. Okay, should we have some fun? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Javier, let's say that you in your company go out there and run a transaction and you delete 1 billion rows from a table. Okay. So now you delete this 1 billion rows, and as part of this, you lock the table. So Gaston is really mad at you. Okay. And he comes over to your desk and he's like, he wants to, why did you do this? So he decides to kill your session, not you, your session. And your session goes in this rollback state thing, right? So you're over here, Gaston's killed your session, not you, your session, you got in rollback state. And you guys are like, great, this thing's in rollback, we're still blocking everybody. What are we doing? So Cristobal, this whole time, he manages the transaction log for this company, right? And he comes over to your desk and says, hey, man, we can't truncate the log. It's growing out of control. Okay. Now, Alex is a really smart guy. And Alex follows people like Paul Randall on the internet. So Paul's a friend of mine, so I can make fun of him. So Alex says, I read that if I crash SQL Server, if I just kill it right now, and we bring it back up, we'll just solve our business problems. So Alex does that. And you guys are like, sure, Alex, you're a smart guy. So he crashes SQL Server. It comes back up. And all of a sudden, in the error log, it says, 1%, 2%.
And I never saw that, by the way.
This is my life in support for 20 years. People would call me and say, Bob, how long will it take to that 2% thing? And I'm like, you know what my answer was? It takes as long as it takes. Now, so the answer is, what's the answer? Well, we came along with a technology we first built in the cloud to help support things like hyperscale. And we call it constant time recovery. That was our goal. We wanted recovery to be always the same amount of time. So we didn't quite achieve that, but we did something pretty amazing. And that was we store versions of your changes in your database. It's kind of like versioning with TempDB for snapshots, but not quite the same. And because we store these versions in your database, now all of a sudden we don't have to do crazy things like compensation records. So your billion row delete turns into 1 billion inserts in the transaction log, right? So things like undo recovery and rollback happen super fast. This scenario that I just described to you, this crazy scenario where you guys all want to strangle each other, it's just gone. And by the way, we're so confident of this technology, it's on by default in Azure SQL, and you can't even turn it off. It just works that way. It's just part of the SQL engine. We're more conservative, obviously, on premises, so that's something that you got to opt into to use. But I love telling that story. I always get a big laugh from the audience when I tell that story. It's a true story. People resonate with this thing, right? And it is absolutely my most favorite feature in SQL 19. I probably just made many engineering people mad at me because I didn't pick their feature. But that's my favorite.
Okay, good.
Well, thank you, Bob. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoy as we do.
So, I had so much fun. Thank you for having me. Okay. It's an honor to be here.
Okay. So if you want to say goodbye to some words to the entire Latam community, the audience is yours.
Do I say buenas noches?
Okay.
Buenas noches. Goodbye, everybody. You have a great, wonderful evening. Thank you for your support of Microsoft, and especially thank you for supporting your communities. Without your SQL family communities, we wouldn't have a product, so thank you for that. Thanks for having me today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Bob, for this.
Thank you for your time and your words. Okay, I'm going to change to Spanish again. Bueno, gracias a todos por habernos acompañado. Espero que hayan disfrutado como nosotros de haber estado con Bob. Y bueno, los esperamos el próximo 8 de abril. Vamos a tener una mesa súper interesante con Fernanda Chamberini desde Perú, gerenta de gestión humana en Centria. Alma Cárdenas desde Bellevue, es la Senior Program Manager de AI for Earth en Microsoft. Marianela Guerre, IT Manager del Instituto Nacional de Investigación Agropecuaria en Uruguay. Y con Cristina González, quien es la Program Manager de los MVP Community para España. Así que bueno, los esperamos. Gracias por acompañarnos y nos vemos en algunas semanitas. Chau, chau.